Spiritual growth and expectations versus reality.
Versus reality. Yes, yes, yes.
All right.
And welcome, y'all. So this is our first podcast. Welcome to Motherland with Isabel and Oneika.
I know, it's so weird.
I know it's weird because it's interesting because Melanie was the one who brought us together. But this is just going to be like an extension of when I was on your podcast. Remember that conversation?
Yeah. Yeah. I think this topic on spiritual growth versus expectations versus reality, I think this is a good topic because I think even in having, to be honest, like even having Mal leave, like that's a part of spiritual growth in a way.
Yep.
So things don't always work out the way we think they're going to work out.
And sometimes there's a reason for that. And before we get started, I'm going to pull a card.
Yeah.
Artemis, Brave Spirit.
Yeah. That's a good one.
It is a good one because I think when we're talking about spiritual growth, even just the idea of going on a spiritual journey is a big deal. Mm-hmm. And it takes a courageous heart for people to go on their journey. I know for me, it was terrifying, but I didn't really have a choice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I think we always have a choice. Whether we choose to continue following it or not is the thing, but we always have a choice in it. I mean, I think there's different layers. Like, I always heard people say spiritual growth is like an onion, right? We're like an onion, meaning that we have all these layers that we have to like pull and pull and pull. Mal mentioned it last time in the last podcast. I remember when she said, oh, people get comfortable. People get comfortable. And I think that's why I said, like, we all have a choice. How comfortable are you, or how uncomfortable are you willing to get? Brene Brown speaks a lot about being vulnerable and vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I really love that because that's where she always talks about how being vulnerable is growth. When you allow yourself to be vulnerable, there's growth in that.
Mm-hmm. When she talks about the bravest thing that you can do is to tell your own story and to stand in your truth, I think it is true. One of the biggest things when I first decided that I didn't want to be the person I was anymore, I think I see it as not being a choice, because my choice was to either keep suffering the way that I was suffering and grasping for and holding on to all these material things. Like I was kind of obsessed with like making the right amount of money and living in the right place and having the right job. But it kept like, the more I kept reaching and grabbing for like material things, the more I felt like the hole inside me was getting bigger and bigger and bigger. So when the rug was pulled out from under me, I decided like, oh, I can keep doing this.
Right.
But the hole is just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And I decided, I was in a yoga class, and I was standing in a yoga class, and the teacher said, you can change or be comfortable, but you can't do both at the same time.
Ooh, that's a good one.
And I started crying. Like I was just in chair pose in a hot yoga class in Manhattan. It was like over 100 degrees, over 70% humidity, and tears are literally just streaming down my face because I knew I could not go back. Yeah. And that was more terrifying than anything, because I knew I was leaving everything behind and I had no idea what the fuck was in front of me. But I was going to do it.
I love that. I think that we have to look at, and there's so much I see myself in that, because that's exactly what happened with me in my journey. But I'm remembering right now, like, what gets you to that point. And I think we have to realize, like, it's not always like an automatic shift overnight. It's not an automatic change overnight. But I think that spirit, I'm going to say spirit, however you want to word it, it's fine. But spirit, I think, is gentle with us in letting, like, okay, here's your truth, and we'll show you this. We'll show you this, show you this, show you this. And then I think it eventually kind of builds up to a point that we're like, okay, you can stay here. And even though you say use the word to be comfortable here, I think it's not comfortable. I think you're allowing yourself to live in uncomfortability because you're not happy. There's not joy in that. You know it, but you're like, it's safe. That's the thing. It's safe. So it's either you can choose to be safe, or you can go over on the other side where it might be a little illogical, it might be a little crazy, but there will be safety and truth in it later on. But I'm just saying this for the listeners, like, it builds up. It's not like a, one thing after another, but it comes to a point that you're like, do I pick it or do I not pick it? But I like the fact that you're like, you can't see it, because you said that, and I think it's true. You can't see what's on the other side.
Mhm.
I don't think you always can. You know it's there, you have an idea or a thought process, but I don't think you always clearly can see it.
No, and I knew at that point, and I love what you first, I love what you were saying about this idea that it was a slow build, because it was a slow build for me. And I keep talking about my job because that's all I had. Like I was what I did for a living, right? Like at the time I worked for Barnes and Noble. Well, at that time when I was in that yoga class, I was unemployed, but I had worked for Barnes and Noble, and that was kind of my identity. So my job was my identity. Like all of my friends were related to work. I wasn't really in touch with any friends. I didn't have a lot of friends in my neighborhood. And I felt that my world was kind of falling apart. And the catalyst, for those of you who are listening who know me, they know this story that I had been dating somebody off and on who got killed in Iraq. And I didn't mourn that process. And in fact, I made a whole bunch of terrible decisions after that. And I think that was the first thing that spirit and the universe was telling me, like, you can't keep going this way. You can't keep going this way. Death is coming if you keep going this way, whatever death meant, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then I realized that if I was going to get to the other side, whatever that was, I had to stop being okay with suffering the way that I was. Because that whole idea of being comfortable with the bullshit that was around me, because we're adaptable as humans. We get used to terrible situations. Look at how many people are in terrible situations in their life, and other people are like, how can you stay there? And for some people, how can I not? Because the thought of going someplace else is so terrifying, and it's the fear. It wasn't what was on the other side. It was the fear of the unknown was the big thing.
Mm. You mentioned a thing, and I have a question. Do you think that when we're evolving and we're changing, spirit creates a place where we're alone?
Yes. Yes. And by alone, I think away from other people, but it gives us space to connect with spirit. Because when that teacher, Catherine Price was her name, when she said you can change or be comfortable at the same time, I swear there was nobody else in the room but just me.
Mm-hmm.
I felt like it was just me, and her voice was almost like a beckon for spirit to come in, because I swear I felt like I was the only person in that room, because I was crying. I wasn't somebody who would show my emotions except anger in front of anybody. And tears were just like I couldn't stop it, and I didn't care, because I felt like, I was being reborn, or I was being called somewhere, and I just had to say yes. And I went home and I cried. It was like an eat, pray, love moment. I was on my bathroom floor, just like hysterical, because I didn't know what I was going to do. And I lived in this very expensive and beautiful condo that I knew if I was going to be a yoga teacher and give up my life, I was going to have to give that place up. I was going to have to give up all my stuff and all my things and all my vacations and my shopping. And yet I knew I was going to do it, because I didn't want to be who I was anymore.
Yeah. I don't even know if you really know my story. I know you haven't read my book.
No.
I'm not mad. I'm just like, but that's so funny. That's exactly what I even write in the book about, how there was a point that I was sitting on my floor in my room, screaming into a pillow, crying, like just like breaking down. Because the same thing, I just couldn't be who I was anymore in the situation I was. For those that don't know, I was married 17 years. So I was with my partner at that time for 20. So that's pretty much from the age of, I met him when I was 17 turning 18, and then all the way. So that's my whole life at that point, right? That's a long time. There's a lot of growth in your own self, whether spiritual or unspiritual, that you go through in growing up, right? Kids and all of that. And I say that because when I was with him, I love that second year spirit says, I chose to leave a place of safety, because as I was with him, even though I desired to work, I loved to work. I worked when we first were married, and everything. His job was so demanding that I literally couldn't work. I had 4 kids and I couldn't work because his job was too demanding. So it made this, what I do for a living now, as a part-time off and on. But I wasn't happy I could have or want. I didn't need or want for anything. I had a beautiful home that some would state was my dream home, even though I knew it wasn't. I always knew, like, this is not my forever home, but everybody was like, it's beautiful. Um, and I guess you could say I was taken care of. Like, I was
Yeah.
taken care of. But when I chose to leave, right, and I always say this, when I chose to leave, it meant that I was leaving all of that security. I no longer would have that, and had no idea what my life would look like. None. And at the same time, though, I knew that I was unhappy, and I was tired of being unhappy. I was tired of suffocating. I was tired of hiding my voice. I was tired of not living in my truth. And I was tired of being this person that was like wearing a mask all day. I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. But it was layers to get there, because right before I got there, I left my mentor. So like months before, I left the mentor who I was with for 5 years. Then I went, and then this went. So it was like one thing after another. And when I left, you're talking from leaving a beautiful home with a hosting party house with a pool and a sunroom, and it was a beautiful home, to literally, I think our apartment was, I want to go for the big number and say 800 square feet with 4 children.
Whoa.
So I left, and that's right, it was 800 square feet apartment with 4 kids, and I went to make $700 a month. And that's where we were. And I stayed there. And I stayed there for a while, right? We had to go through COVID in that little apartment. But I would make the choice 10 times over for where I'm at now, and for where my kids are at now. But I said all that because it's like, it wasn't safe. It wasn't even logical. It was crazy. It was crazy. But like you, I think it gets to a point that we can't do it anymore. And it's like, okay, you can keep trying. You can keep trying, by all means, go ahead. But go ahead. But I think that's what I always try to tell people. Like you said, like, this is supposed to be spiritual growth, expectations versus reality. I don't know what people's expectations are when they start on this journey.
Yeah. Yeah. And people tend to see the outside, right? Because I did something that a lot of people don't do. I left my career at my prime earning years, right? Like, I stepped out of my career when I was about to step in to making the most money that I was going to make, right? And I know a lot of people thought maybe I had slipped away from reality, that I got scared, that I chickened out, and that I couldn't cut it. These were some of the things that people who are no longer friends told me, because other people were telling them that. And I was like, why do people feel comfortable talking about me to you like that? Like, that's not cool. And then I created this life that feels really satisfying. And no, I don't make what I used to make before. And it's okay, because I realized that my life is more than that. But now I have like lots of people even asking me, like, how did you create this career for yourself? How did you do this? Like, talk to me about it, because I want to do that too. And I don't know if I would recommend the path that I did. I literally just quit everything. I literally walked away from my whole life. No game plan. I just was out. I was like, you know what? I can't do this. So I'm done. I'm going to be a yoga teacher, I guess. And then just cobbled things together. But I was open. And so I think that was a big part of it. But I had everything. Like, I had nothing. Even my car. I had this moment in yoga teacher training when I was like on this spiritual high, like, I don't need things. I don't need stuff. I don't need all that material stuff. And then it was Hurricane Sandy came to the East Coast, and my car floated away in a parking lot, like submerged.
You said you didn't need
I said it. I said I didn't need it. And you know what? Spirit said, bet, we'll take it.
Bet.
And I was like, oh, and I realized 2 things at that moment. One, I should shut the fuck up sometimes, because I'm always running my mouth. And 2, manifesting's real. And I need to be careful of what I say, because stuff happens. And it was such a lesson. And I'm glad it happened because I realized how powerful I could be if I chose to be, but things wouldn't always unfold the way that I wanted them to. So
Yeah.
when people ask me, like, I want to do what you did, I say you need to do what's right for you and not what I did, because it may look really cool now. I'm on a podcast with this really cool chick, Isabel, and I'm doing all these things, and that looks really awesome. But it's also really hard work. Like, it's
Yeah.
also a struggle. But I show up for myself every day.
Right. Right.
People don't see that part,
Well,
even though we talk about it. I mean, we
yeah.
talk about it.
There's truth in living. There's joy in living your truth. There's joy in living your truth. My son
Mm-hmm.
yesterday was like, we were talking about stuff, and he's like, something about, well, everyone lies, you lie. And I was like, I honestly can say I don't. Like, I can say at this point in my life, I do not lie. Have I lied? Absolutely. I was like, but I don't lie. Like, I can literally wake up and live in my truth every day. And I am who I am, like it or leave it, but I don't lie. You mentioned a part of that in when you were talking about how, like, the thought process of, I don't need this, right? I don't need that. And I think that's one of the key topics when we're talking about spiritual growth, expectation versus reality, is the form of like what we take on as we step into spirituality, right? Like, people think that spirituality has to look, like I always say, rainbows, right? Rainbows and, I don't know, glitter. And it's like, sorry, no offense to the LGBTQ community, but
No offense to glitter.
no offense to glitter. I literally realized. But they no offense to glitter. That's what they think they're taking on, though. They're like, oh, yeah, my life is going to be this great thing. And I've heard that, right? I don't need materials. I don't need this. I don't need that. It's bad. But it's like, no, that's not the way it works. Like, this is not what it is, right? It's a form of, when you think like that, like, honestly, it's a form of escapism.
Yes.
Yeah.
It's a bypassing,
Yeah.
right? It's a way to get around what you really need to go through. Like, the only way through this journey is through this journey. It's the only way you can do it. And I love what you said about not lying, because I used to lie all of the time. I don't feel shame about it anymore because I think I've reconciled it. But I used to lie all of the time, I think out of protection. For myself. I think I was so uncomfortable in my own skin. I was so uncomfortable with different like traumas that I hadn't processed. So I felt like I didn't want to deal with myself, and I would just lie and make things up. And it was almost like second nature to do it, just to sort of keep up this facade of who I was. And I don't lie either. And I forget lots of things. And I think that's the thing that happens when you tell the truth all the time. You don't have to remember anything, because you're just sort of being who you are. And that feels more freeing than anything, to be able to just be yourself. On Thanksgiving of this year, I woke up to a message on an old post from my ex-fiance. That was from my 50th birthday. And it was this, it didn't say his name, so I had to do a little bit of homework to figure out it was him. But it was like, you think you're so spiritual, but you've hurt people, and you can't be on a spiritual path until you've made amends. And it was this whole thing, right? It was this like whole thing. And I felt bad because I was like, yeah, you know what? I hurt him. I did. I hurt him, and our relationship ended for a reason, which I'm not going to share because that's his business. But what I did do, I messaged him instead of sort of like putting him on blast and like on my feed. And I said, listen, our relationship ended for the reasons that you know, but I didn't end it gracefully. And I did not show a lot of grace. I did not show a lot of mercy, and I was mean and I was awful. And for that, I apologize. And if you want to hear an apology in person or on the phone, like, happy to do it. But I like had to own my shit around that. And I think that's also the thing that happens, right? Yeah. Expectations versus reality. Like, just because you are on this path and there's people that you've hurt in the past, you don't necessarily get to make amends with everybody. Not everything just falls into place. The wreckage that I had caused in the past is still wreckage. I have burnt some really great friendships that I'm sad about, and that's my fault, and I have to own that. And there's nothing else I can do but to own that and keep going forward and know that I won't make those
Right.
mistakes again.
Right.
And I think that's also really important when you're on your journey and your path. It's uncomfortable to look at yourself, but the only way forward is to do that.
100%. And I think that's the thing, that's when we talk about spiritual bypassing, right? So I think the spiritual bypass is the fact that if you're uncomfortable, then you're doing it wrong. If you're uncomfortable, it's wrong, right? So let me focus on all that other stuff, right? Like, no offense to those. I'm not saying they're not real, but like, let me focus on, the 5D and like the aliens and what, star sign I am and blah, 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 versus let yourself get comfortable. Let yourself get comfortable in the uncomfortability.
Yep.
Because I think we constantly, as humans, right, we want to jump to the next thing. We want to jump to the next thing that's going to keep giving us that high. That's going to keep giving us that spiritual high, if you want a sense. But what you're doing is only ignoring what needs to be. And I think that's why I want to, in this topic alone, and why I talk about it all the time, it's like, if you're constantly focusing, no, there's nothing wrong with light and love, but if you're constantly focusing on light and love, then you're not doing your work on everything else that's rising up, right? So that's why I just like, I don't know.
Yeah, no, you're right, because that whole love and light thing, it gets on my nerves. I'm just gonna say it. It does, because I feel like a lot of people who say love and light are using it to bypass.
Right.
And it also makes an assumption that dark is bad. And that, as a Black person, that annoys the shit out of me. That dark is bad, light is good, and light is light and dark is dark, and both are necessary for us to exist. Exactly. Darkness is good. We heal in darkness. We sleep in darkness. We're born. We form ourselves in darkness. Too much light, we burn up. Too much darkness, we get sick. And it's about balance. And we're not good in the United States about talking about balance. It's all about instant gratification. There's no ability to feel uncomfortable. There's no ability to sort of own your feelings. But if we're talking, spirit, universe, God, whatever you choose to call it, it's all about wholeness. It's about the entirety of our experience, which means that if I push away shit that I don't want to see, all I'm doing is making another gap that I'm going to have to fill with something. So I might as well embrace all of it and be full.
Yeah. I'm going to say it because you said it. One of the biggest points, my eyes are closed, I'm just listening to Spirit right now. One of the biggest points that you were saying right now is, God, my mind just went, God, you just said it right now and I can't even think what it was. I can't even remember. Dang it. It was such a good point that you just said right now. And I can't even remember what it was.
It'll come back.
I
want to ask you, when you had that moment and you knew you were going to leave, what did it feel like?
I think the first thing I can say, it felt like death.
Yeah.
I think that's the quickest response that I got right now, is that it felt like death. It was hard. It was scary. I mean, that's why I coach women in it now, in a sense. But I knew, making the choice I made, I was not only rewriting my own path, but rewriting my kids' path. And I knew also in that it wasn't just my kids' path, it was the karmic path of my family. I was the upcoming matriarch. Like, I was my grandpa's right hand. Yeah. And so I knew me ending this marriage was taking an impact, not just in my own household, but the household of so many. I was scared, and I knew it was a piece of me was dying at that point, but it was already dead in a sense. I don't know what to say. Like, it just was really hard. I remember the night before, and I read this recently in my book. I've been reading my book every day on TikTok to my group. And I remember reading recently, and it was really hard for me to read, on how the anxiety I felt the night before I had to tell the kids the decision we made. Like, okay, this is what we chose. This is what we're doing. It's hard for me right now to be like, oh, what exactly was everything in that moment? But I can just say the closest thing it felt like was death. Like, I was like, okay. But in order for us to live our truth and to be authentic, it means that we're going to have to deal with some really ugly things. And we're going to have to deal with, like, so many feelings and things that we've buried under the rug. And we're going to have to look at that. Our truth isn't defined, and I think that's the issue, right? We can go back into how this all happened, assimilation and stuff, but our truth is not defined based on everyone else's truth for us. Your truth has to be defined on the truth for yourself and what that looks like. And it doesn't always look like what everybody wants or what everybody expects from you. It's what you choose to give to yourself and what it looks like. But the only person that has that textbook or guidebook is you. I don't even have, it's like, yeah, I can sit here and read you, but at the same time, you have the guidebook, you have the textbook. What does it look like? But that's where everybody stops. People think, oh, wait, I messed up, or, oh, it shouldn't feel this way, or, oh, just because I'm following my purpose, it should be really easy. Who freaking told you it should be easy to follow your purpose?
Exactly.
Like, who told you that? Like, that is such BS. Like, to follow your purpose means you're going to have to live it. You're going to have to live it. And to live it and to be an example to others means you might have to be ripping shit up that you just did not even want to rip up or expect to rip up. And so like you said, it's not always light. It's not always like that. It's not always, it feels really good. But I do have to say at the end it does. I do have to say
absolutely. But people don't always want to hold on to that part, right? Like,
and that's the part that I think sitting with yourself and being present is where that comes key, because we're so used to living in, like you said, instant gratification. And we're so used to feeling like, oh, well, then I should feel peace. I should feel this. One of the exercises I always give people is like, let your future self lead you. Sit with your future self. Let them hold that space for you and let them guide you. Because that's what held space for me. That's what guided me, was my future self saying, every day I'd sit and meditate and I'd just be like, oh, I can just feel it. I can feel peace. I can feel love. I can feel my purpose. And I was like, I'm chasing that. That's what I'm going to go after, and let that space be created. And that's where, literally, I'm telling you guys, it wasn't instant gratification. I just told you, I moved into a little apartment, 4 kids, and I went back to preschool teaching.
Yep.
And it took a long time to get back to where I'm at now. But like I said, I love that I get to be who I am every day.
When I left my condo, I felt like a failure. I remember talking to my dad. Wow, I didn't think I would cry even telling the story, because it didn't feel that emotional. But I remember thinking I feel like a failure because I'm supposed to have this pretty house and this pretty place, and I'm walking away from it to start over to be a yoga teacher. Like, am I out of my mind? And I remember my dad saying, the American dream as they sell it is bullshit. This whole idea that you have to own a house and do all these things. You don't need to do that to be happy.
Yeah.
And guess what? You could find help if you needed it. There's resources. Don't worry about that. You need to be happy. And I was like, I know he's right, but I'm still terrified. So my moving truck was going over to my new place, and it wasn't far. I could walk, and I had my dog at the time, Dakota, and we were walking from my old place to my new neighborhood, still in Jersey City. And I was walking. I felt like I was marching to death, even though it was a beautiful apartment. It was a lot smaller. And I walked in, and I looked around, and my dog started running in circles, and she was not the happiest dog. She had a lot of trauma. So I knew. I was like, oh, okay, I'm okay. Slept that night. The next morning I went downstairs. I was going to go outside and get some coffee. And there was an Ashley furniture truck outside, delivering, I guess, to someplace else. And Eric, he was the person who died in Iraq, who was sort of sent me on this whole journey. There was a stock photo of him on the Ashley furniture truck. He used to model.
Oh my God. I'm like, what?
Yeah. I probably should have led with that. He used to be he was a model.
Yeah.
So there was the picture of him because he had done a shoot with them. And it was across the street, and I just started laughing. Yeah. I was like, okay, he's telling me I'm all right. I'm good. And so it felt like such a relief just to see that. And he had been gone for a few years. It was strange. And I was like, wow, that's the whole thing about stock photos. They can pop up anywhere, But of all of the places, right? Of all of the places, across the street from my apartment, it was a gift.
Yeah.
And I think those are the times that you feel settled, and you know that you're on the right path, and you will get those signs. You will get that, you will get that sort of affirmation that you're doing the right thing. Just when you think like you want to give up or you're questioning if this was the wrong decision. But you have to keep going. Like you do have to keep going.
Do you ever think growth ends?
No, I don't. I don't. Um, and if for a moment I do, the rug gets pulled out from under me just as I'm starting to get comfortable. There's always something to slap me around in case I get too cocky that I have this whole shit figured out.
Yeah. No,
Um,
I don't think we
yeah.
ever have it figured out.
No, and I'm glad though. But I think the more I study, the more I sit with myself, the more wisdom I gain, the less I realize that I know.
Do you think that like as a person, well, I think as anybody, right, there's always layers like to our evolve to our spiritual growth and how we evolve as humans. But do you also think that as we're evolving as humans, there's how do you guys want to say this? I'm asking spirit right now because I'm like,
Yeah.
are there stages to spiritual growth? They're like, absolutely, there's stages to spiritual growth. However, I think it starts with like, let's say you sum up the first layers, right? It's all you. It's like where in just you, not racially, but where in you have you assimilated in your own life because of your parents
Yes.
or the way you are or your thought processes or your beliefs, right? And then breaking down all of those in order to see who you are, right? So then you see who you are, then you got to make the choice, and do you want to follow it or you want to stay? So let's say you chose to follow, then you start living, which I think what people expect, well, isn't this where bliss comes in? Like isn't this where joy comes in? And you keep pushing. Let's say you just keep pushing to get there. And then I think it's like, okay, depending on what you are, like as a BIPOC, right? It's like then you got to break down the whole, that whole appropriation thing that happened,
Yep.
you know, with your life in general. And then I think with spirituality as well. So I think it's always like layers, 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 layers until what?
I think until I'm out of this body. And even then, it's like, will I make a choice to come back or do I make a choice to stay? But I think that's really interesting. I was actually literally just writing about this for my book. The whole idea of being a black queer woman and being told in like the meditation communities and different spiritual communities that me talking about my race or my experience in my body is somehow like being too political or not honoring the path because I'm just supposed to be one with everything. So I should ignore, my race or my gender or my sexuality or my experiences. And I call bullshit on that because if we're all connected, right? My experiences are impacting you. And if we don't deal with them, we can't transcend and we can't get to this place of enlightenment.
I'm
But I think for me, I held on to my race because it was always in opposition. And I've said this before to like white supremacy. And I think the real fear was who am I if I let go of my blackness in relationship to whiteness? And that was scary for me because so much of my identity was wrapped up in fighting against white supremacy. And to give that up was another place of stepping into the unknown. I had been filling up so much of myself fighting. And
Mhm.
then to let go of that, I was like, oh shit, what am I going to put there?
I like that you said that. I was literally, I don't know if you listened to my Instagram yesterday, I posted about how there's quite a balance in learning how to do that. Like when you really
Mm-hmm.
have to do the work when it comes to your race and learning like, wait a second, this is how we were, what was taken or appropriated and like things
Mm-hmm.
that would happen. And that includes like I don't think you can separate spirituality from whether you're black or brown or
Mm-hmm.
whatever it is, indigenous, like you can't separate it because that was who we were. That was our culture. But at the same time, like I heard culture that was stolen. I understand. But you there's a balance to it. There's a balance in still seeing yourself and not coming from a state of I'm really pissed off and mad and angry. I'm really angry. Like this really sucks and let me
Mm-hmm.
be mad at, every freaking white person because of what they took. But yeah, there is a balance that you definitely have to learn in bringing back your own self into in finding that. Um it's I don't know. It's interesting because even like you said it earlier, I forget what you said again, but the point was that what I picked up was the other day I was reading about midwives. I was
Mm,
reading about Latino how do you guys want to say? Like the mix of black and Latin, right?
okay.
I can't think of the word right now, the name, but that's what I was reading. And it was talking about how, Cubans had like their midwives and all Europeans and how it all worked. But what was interesting was, right, and depending on where you were either great and seen with like, okay, you're high up, or you were seen as
Hmm.
like, oh, you're dirty and you're poor and you're things.
Hmm.
So in the midwives alone, they took it and were like, well, let's resell it to the Europeans and try to get them to become our midwives. Like try to take it from them to become the midwives so that even people that have been appropriating, been doing this for years, were no longer allowed to practice because then
Yep.
they were arrested and however it was. So there's definitely, you have to look at all these things, right? So when you're going back and you're like, let me grow, let me look at all these parts of me, like that means that you have to call back all these parts of you and you have to look at where it was, lost, because it's like you guys want to talk about standing in your truth, but what do you do when your truth has been wrong this whole time?
Hmm. That.
Told your truth has been wrong the whole time, whether it's by your parents or whether it's by society. You've been told your truth is wrong the whole time. So what does that mean and how does that look like, and I think that's the thing. It's like I think it constantly looks different for everybody and you have to learn to listen to it, but there's a lot of breaking it down, breaking it down to find what that is. Because I can tell you, like, honestly, like, I think within the last like year, there's been a lot of frustration in it, where I'm like, damn, like, even me practicing what I practice or living the life I lead, my mentor, she was white. I mean,
Hmm.
no offense to that, but like I was taught at spirit, like we say, spiritual bypassing was what I was taught. So
Uh-huh.
now understanding spirituality as my own,
Hmm.
as my own is been really interesting. Like as brown, I don't even know what to call myself anymore. I think that's how deep I've gone. I'm like, am I Mexican? Am I Latin? I don't know what to call. But like
Right.
me, like that's a lot. Like that's a lot to
Uh-huh.
break apart. And I think just everything, no matter where you're at, I think spiritual growth just comes down to the balance that you have to find within yourself.
That's the onion thing that you were talking about that I think is it's a beautiful metaphor because I spent a lot of time in the angry place around racism, like a lot of time in the angry place.
Mm-hmm.
I was like an English and Africana studies major at school, and I went to predominantly white college. Um, and I remember, I think it might have been my sophomore, or it might have been my junior year. That doesn't really matter. But the point is that I was talking to my roommates who are also black, and I was saying, I think it's been almost like a month, and I haven't talked to a white person. Like to go to a predominantly white school and to go a month without talking to a white person, because all my classes were black, all of my friends were black. I sat with black kids in the cafeteria, and I realized, like, whoa, it felt like a celebration because I had actually not ever had that experience growing up in high school. B, it made me realize how segregated the United States was, that this experience could happen in college. And I was like, whoa, this is something for me to think about. And like, flash forward decades later, I was still in that place for a long time. And then when I started to really embrace meditation and Buddhist philosophy and yogic philosophy, I was like, yes, I want to transcend. And why have I been holding on to this lens of whiteness that's been seen, like lens of blackness that's been seen through whiteness for so long? And I had to
I
shed it.
know.
I
Yeah.
had to shed it and
Yeah.
I had to grieve. And once I grieved my anger, I was like, I don't need that anymore. My blackness is defined by how I define it.
Yeah. And that's so true. I love that. I think that's the thing, especially there's 2 points to this, right? Because I have a question for you, but I think that a lot with spirituality in the way we step in, right? Crystals or whatnot, like that's always brought in. But I would love that my guides are always telling people, like, when it comes to rituals, like, you guys know how to create rituals, create your own freaking ritual. Like, learn to listen to yourself and what that looks like
Mhm.
for yourself versus, okay, you got to have, this crystal to do this ritual
Mhm.
in line with this way. It's like, you guys been doing this for thousands of years, like thousands of years. It's ingrained in you. Now, whether you want to look at that or not is the other question of spiritual growth, but it's ingrained in you, right? Um, and I love the fact that we use the word new age movement, but it's like, it's not a movement. It's not a movement. Like, this is your life. This is what you guys were born and your beliefs. But okay, I have a question. Looking at the sense of what you said, how would you, this is such a weird question, but I want to ask it. How would you encourage anyone, a POC or however you want to word it, to not be racist or angry with a white person?
I think, first of all, whiteness is a construct, right? I think whiteness is a construct, and I think that we're all infected by racism. Black people, brown people, white people, we all have to decolonize our own minds.
Mhm.
And I think you first have to acknowledge that you're angry and you're hurt and you have to grieve. I think that's the first part. Grieving is a part of the process.
Mm.
And
Yeah, that is.
that takes work. And I also think it takes time to, when those like a microaggression comes up, right? From, it doesn't even always have to be a white person. I mean, there's plenty of, black folks who are shitty, and because, that expression, not all skin folk are kinfolk. But I think when that thing happens, you have to always reground yourself into your truth. And it's telling yourself that when certain things happen that come up that are racist, you don't have to lie to yourself and say, did I just imagine that? Tell yourself it's the truth. Tell yourself that what you experienced is real and you're not making it up. Because when you can do that, you can let things go. So much, I think, of people navigating what's happened to us with race is about us pretending like we get gaslit so much by society, we gaslight ourselves. So we tell ourselves this didn't really happen, or I'm making it up, or I'm making a big deal. No, it happened. It's real. You're not crazy. That did happen. So when you can do that, you can ground yourself, then you can start to let things go. It's
Mm.
important that you tell yourself you know what you know. Just like you were talking about, what you know about your rituals because it's in our DNA. You know what you know about what whiteness does to us, and you don't have to pretend it's anything else. When you can do that, you can move differently. You do, because you're no longer trying to prove anything to anybody. And people can say shit to you, and you can be like, yeah, whatever. You can have your truth. I know what's real. I know what's inside me.
Right. Okay. I just ask because I think as a mom with 4 kids, I kind of worry sometimes. I mean, no offense to them, like, hey guys, you still got to be like, you can't think like that. Like, that's not the right way because they can.
I don't know. Well, you know what? So I don't know about that. I think healing goes through stages, just like, there's stages of grief. I think there's stages of grief as it relates to us healing from racism. And so there's anger, denial, depression, anger, bargaining, denial, depression, acceptance,
Mhm.
right? Those are the 5 stages of grief. I think those 5 stages of grief happen through all sorts of healing. Like those are the stages that we go through as we heal. So anger is a useful emotion. Anger can be a righteous thing
Yeah.
that helps us stand up. We can't live in it, right? We can't live in it forever. And I think that's the important point that I
Yeah.
want to make.
Right. Yeah. And
Can't live in the anger. We can't live in the bargaining. We can't live in all of those things because we have to get to acceptance, but we can't skip over anything either.
mhm.
And it's a balance, which is why those practices that you're talking about, that I'm always talking about, that Mel has talked about, those embodiment practices are critical to our healing process. We
Yeah.
have to know what we're feeling inside so we can do something about
Right.
it.
Right. Perfect. I think that's the thing that we want to just clarify today is that as we're looking at our spiritual growth, knowing that if it becomes hard and that these things that are uncomfortable are being called to look at, then it doesn't mean you're doing it wrong. That's pretty much the bottom line.
Yeah, and that you don't have to, like, there's a heal, like, I think I'm seeing it even now in like the social justice space. Like for pre-COVID and all during COVID, there's this focus on white supremacy and we have to confront it and all these things, which is all completely necessary. And then what happens after, right? What happens after we do that? Because we have to do something. And
Like,
that's when joy comes in. That's when we have to celebrate and find places to find joy within ourselves too, because we can't live in anger forever. We
right,
can't live in that fight forever. That's why the onion becomes so important. You have to keep going.
right.
And we tend to get stuck because it gets comfortable.
It gets comfortable, and it's, I think, as we're looking, as we're looking at it and as you're growing, I think it gets comfortable. And then I find it interesting that we're constantly looking at the habit of, well, what can I make myself feel better? Or how can I look at, like, how can I feel better, right? Not within myself, but like outside of myself. So then we
Mm-hmm.
get in the habit of moving forward with things of comfortability, or things that are giving us immediate reassurance, or things that are
Mm-hmm.
telling us that you're safe.
Mm-hmm.
And, I would almost pose the question to everybody listening, like, well, what would you do if you took all those away? Like, what if you lived your life unsafe?
Mm-hmm.
What if you lived your life that way? Then what? What would life look like for you if you were unsafe? Like, how does that make you feel? 100%, most
Mm-hmm.
people are going to be like, I feel really anxious, anxiety, and I don't like it. Like, so does
Right.
that mean that you're going to run from it, or does it mean that you're going to see yourself through it? Because
Right.
I'll tell you right now that if you see yourself through those parts of you that make you so anxious and anxiety, then guess what? You're doing it right. Like, then you're going to learn something. You're going to learn at that, and you're going to see it. But even in the sense that when we talk about race, I don't think it's so much, Rich. I know this goes thousands and thousands and thousands years back, where it's like, yeah, we've learned to be defined by us and our color, but at the same time, like, it's never was, I don't really ever think that was the way it was meant to be. Like,
No, and
and that's
that's
where it's
why I
like,
think too. You raise a good question, right? Because whiteness is not about one white person. And when I say white, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about a construct that was come up that was meant to create and hold power over groups of people,
mhm,
right? So when we talk about whiteness, we're not talking about people, we're talking about a construct
yeah,
that people cling on to. So I think when you are talking to your kids, this isn't about individual white people. This is about a societal construct that runs through
yeah,
all different layers of our society. So when we're confronting it, that's what we're confronting. We're confronting the construct. And it's incredibly important because there are people, white people out here who are not just allies, but accomplices, right? Like
mhm,
an ally is somebody who waves a flag, an accomplice is somebody who has skin in the game. There's people who have skin in the game when it comes to all of this.
love that.
And there are people who just keep their eyes closed too, right? And silence is, complicit. And that happens for people who are black and brown too. There's plenty of people who aren't doing shit, and that's okay. That's their thing, and that's fine. But I think if we're just talking about, all of this in relationship to our spiritual growth, because it is all tied together, you have to keep moving. You have to keep growing. And it isn't all heavy and darkness and it isn't all light, and we have to find ways to celebrate. We have to find ways to honor how we're feeling, and we have to just keep going.
I like that. Yeah, I think that's definitely key, is honoring the way that we are feeling and the way that you are feeling. One of the things that you're saying too, and I am thinking of in that context of what you're breaking up, but also in the context of, like, I'm thinking of all the words that were used when I think of spirituality, right? In the general sense, how people think of it. And like I said, it's all pretty. It also comes with all these extra words, right? You got to have, like, you got to be humble. You got to be kind, right? And it's like, no, you got to honor yourself, and you actually got to see it, right? Have humility, like, whatever that is. There's such a misuse of those words.
Yeah,
But
you don't have to be a doormat, right?
exactly, thank you for that. Yeah, that's
One of
exactly.
my what a yoga teacher who I love says, you can get this love or you can get these hands.
Yeah.
Because it's like you don't let yourself be run over because you're a spiritual person. Like, you got to have a boundary. You got to protect yourself because spirit wants you safe, right? Spirit wants you safe.
Yeah.
And that means that you don't allow yourself to put yourself in harm's way. It's that difference between being nice and being kind.
Yeah. Yeah. All right, hold on. I'll cut that out. Sorry,
Hmm.
there's somebody coming in. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's okay.
it is definitely being nice or being kind, like you said. Yeah.
Yeah, like niceness, I think implies politeness, which is rooted not in
All
spirituality.
right,
I
let's
think,
go there. Yeah,
yeah,
let's go there. I
because
want to say one of the things, right? Because we're going to stake on this path with like the spiritual growth, and like I think this definitely means like the terms and that we
yes,
use and the way it is. Let's go there. Means being niceness, higher self. You
yeah,
don't.
I don't like the word higher self. I don't, and I always push back against it. I do
Tell me why. I
because
want to know why.
Because I don't think it's about being higher or lower. I think it's just about being yourself that's connected to the whole. I don't think that we need to put it in hierarchy. I don't like hierarchical language because I think that puts ourselves into like supremacy talk, like better than something else. Like I don't believe like in low vibes or high vibes. I think vibes are vibes, and I think we need to be careful what we're embracing and what we're pushing away. And I think my, I don't even know if it's my best self, it's my whole self. I love the word whole. Whole is my word. So when I hear people saying higher self, I say whole self, because I
Okay.
think it's whole self that's connected. I think the word nice is rooted um, in politeness, which I think is rooted in power. When we tell people to be nice, especially like women, be nice, we're telling them to shut up and listen and to be polite and not push back. When we say being kind, I think that's a more appropriate word that I use because kind doesn't mean that I'm going to be polite. Kind could mean I'm going to tell you about yourself because A, I love you. I
Right,
don't like you right now, but I love you, so I need to tell you about yourself
right,
because
right,
that's
right.
important.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I like that you said, I like that you said that the whole self. I like that you said that because that is a good way of looking at it because that's the whole point. When I talk about people's higher self, I'm always like, yeah, you learn to embody and live in your higher self, which is really in essence to live and embody in the whole sense of self, right? It's a sense that I always tell people like you are the spiritual version, you are the physical version of your higher self, but you want to live in the wholeness of that and what that is.
Yes.
Like,
See, you mean it as whole, but a lot of people, when they say higher self, they don't mean it like you
well,
mean
that's
it.
why
They
I
mean,
wanted to say that because the fact
yeah,
is you're right, they don't. And it can be really like you said, the sense of like, oh, higher, right? It can be nice and it's kind and it's perfect. And it's like,
and better than people who are not on your path.
well, then
That's
that's just an inflated ego. That's just
right.
an inflated ego. That's what
Exactly.
it is. And it's like, no, 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 no. That's not what we want to go. We don't want to.
Right.
And that's why I wanted to be like, okay, guys, like let's really look at what that is, right? And
A
I
lot of those communities do that. Like
they
they're
do.
better than people because they're on this path. Man, I wasn't on always on the path. So am I shitting on my previous self before I started doing all this work? Of course not.
Yeah.
Like that would be so terrible to
Yeah.
like shit on my previous self because I wasn't where I am now. I mean, every step that I take in my journey is on the path to enlightenment. So that other Oneika decades ago who did all bunch, stupid stuff needed to do that or she wouldn't be here talking to you right now.
And I think that's perfect. It's like no matter where you're at in your journey, understand that you're right where I know it sucks to say that. And I know it sounds so
I
cheesy.
know it's
I
frustrating.
hate saying that sentence, but it's so true at times. Like you're right where you need to be.
I
And
know.
I know, right? Because I'm like, oh, divine timing. And I'm like, I hate divine timing. I hate it. I hate it. But at the same time, sometimes that's what we have to say. And it's like at the same sense, like you have to do the work. And sometimes that means you might stay over here a little bit longer than somebody else did. And that's okay. That's what you need. That's what we're at. But nobody's journey is exactly the same and nobody's growth is exactly the same. And yeah, man, I'm just listening. I'm listening to spirit right now, and they're just like, yeah, you gotta like, excuse my language, like you gotta eat shit at times.
You
Like
do, and it's terrible, and it's true, and it's terrible, and it's true, and it's terrible.
it's like, look, you gotta do this, but there's a point to it to realize, like, oh, um, okay, I'm good. I'm good. And it sucks, I think, being somebody like you and me that are on this other side of it, going like, hey, just keep going, going. And the reason I sucks is because I know a person that does this every day for a living, that there's thousands and thousands of people that are getting thousands and thousands of followers because they're lying to your face about how everything is magical and perfect. And,
Yep.
don't be fearful and have anger and don't have pain and don't have this. And I'm like, are we still freaking doing this? Like, are we still doing this? Like, how long till we stop doing this? And it feels like we make 5 steps forward, and no offense, but like a new app comes out, something new comes out, and somebody's selling you something else again. And it's like, you guys, I'll be honest, and I love that Mal says it too, and she says, those that are bomb as healers and those people that are like sitting in front of you and they don't look the way that you expect. They don't seem the way that you expect. Yeah, because we're not freaking sellable. Because we're not selling what you guys want. We're not selling some bullshit. Like, we're actually selling the truth, what looks like, oh, are you ready to do the work? Do you want to do the work? There's always going to be an easy way out. There will always be an easy way out. Whether you create it or somebody else creates it for you, there will always be an easy way out. But yeah, and it may not always be pretty, like I said, and it means that there's going to be relationships that fail. I don't even like the word fail. There's just relationships that don't align with you and don't work anymore with you. There's
That.
friendships that go away.
Can you talk about that? Can you talk about like what happens with some friendships or relationships on the journey?
I think we get used. Okay. The dynamic, I'm going to close my eyes for a second. The dynamic that you provide in the relationships and friendships is the one that everybody gets really used to. So that means that you may provide, without realizing, a sense of safety for somebody else to hide behind or not be seen. When you choose not to be somebody's safety net, or when you choose to be your own safety net, however you want to word it, right? It means that people are going to be like, what the heck's wrong with you? What is it? What are you doing? What is that? What is this? Right? And what we tend to do as humans, right, is try to pull them along the journey or try to tell them, oh, this is it. Let me force this on. Let me show you, right? I'm like, don't do that. Just do you, boo. But it means that relationships and friendships are going to fall away. It means that even family included are going to come at you. They may come at you. They may tell you what you're doing is wrong. They may tell you what you're doing is evil. They may call you selfish. They're going to call you names, whatever it is. And I think this is your own opportunity to see your own power and truth, to say, no, I know what I am, and I stand in my truth, and I stand in my light, and I'm going to keep going forward in what I know is right for me. But I know personally, I can tell you some stories, but personally we'll sum it up where I've had plenty of family members turn their back on me, literally, like literally in the presence of me too. I've had friendships end, multiple. My best friendship itself just crumbled, so it's just like, when you decide to align with what's right for you and not what's right for everybody else, that means that relationships, friendships, family members are going to not want to work with you, be around you, and that's fine.
That's fine. And that there are also friendships that on your journey that are only there temporarily for
Right.
a certain amount of time, because that's just what it's supposed to be there for, and that's okay too.
Right. That's why I asked you at the beginning, do you think that this is alone? You have to be alone in your journey. That's why I asked you that at the beginning, because I'm like, I find that as you're evolving, you are more alone at some points.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you are more alone.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's why people are like, wait, I didn't sign up for this. I didn't sign up to feel like shit and to be by myself. Like, I didn't choose this for that.
Yeah, that's interesting that you should say that, because what I didn't know my whole life was, and until I started working with people and they pointed it out to me, that I can hold like a lot of space.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very grounded, which I never realized because I think I used to fight against it so much.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't realize how much space I could hold, and it's a lot. And it's more than I would like to sometimes. And sometimes does feel lonely, because I'm not always sure when I need to have somebody hold space for me, like where I go and who could do that. And that took some time to sort of figure all of that out. So there are points of like loneliness on this journey. And I think the more that you keep exploring, there are times the lonelier it gets. And I think you start to also call in people who are on your path, who are connected with you, who are going to be like your ride and die soul people who you will see or who you will recognize from previous lives as well.
No, I think that's definitely, I think the more that you work on it, so it can be lonely at first, but I think the more that you work on it, you start aligning with those people and creating those relationships 100.
Yeah.
But I think that's the same, like I can go down the whole path of why that is though. You know, it's like you are projecting out an energy and then you're going to attract that energy back to you. Just the same way as like if you're projecting an energy out that's like, oh, I need to be needed in this way, or oh, I'm safe to hide behind, or I'll take all your bullshit. Like you're going to attract those relationships in that same sense. So
yeah,
you know, you mentioned something about niceness versus kindness earlier, and it's kind of going back into like you got to be kind to yourself. You got to be kind to yourself. You know, in those ways and while you're doing this, because that's because everybody's can be nice to you, but you got to be kind to yourself.
Yes, everybody can be nice to you, but you have to be kind to yourself. I like that.
So I don't know, anything else you want to say before we did?
No, I think that's a beautiful place to end.
Okay, all right guys, we'll talk to you later.
Thank you.
Bye.